Imagine that. A lion, right? Not just any lion, but this massive, golden beast with a mane that looked like the sun itself was sitting on his shoulders. This guy wasn't messing around. His territory, smack in the wild heart of Kenya, was his kingdom, and he wasn't about to let anyone forget it. We're talking about a place where the air's hot, the grass is tall, and every day's a fight just to eat. But this lion, he didn't just survive. He owned it. One day, though, things got wild. Like, really wild. The hyenas showed up. Not one or two, but 400 of them. Yeah, you heard that right. 400 cackling, scrappy hyenas, all teeth and attitude, rolling into his turf like they owned the place. They were everywhere, yipping and howling, thinking they could swarm in and take over. Most lions would have backed off or picked a fight they couldn't win. Not this guy. He planted his paws, let out a roar that shook the ground, and charged. Full on, no hesitation. Those hyenas didn't know what hit them. He was a blur of claws and fury, tearing through the pack like they were nothing. One by one, they started running, tails tucked, whining like pups. By the end, all 400 were gone, scattered across the plains, too scared to even look back. The king had spoken, but that wasn't the end of it. Oh no, this lion had more to deal with. See, his territory stretched down to this river, prime real estate, shady trees, good water. Problem was, it was crawling with crocodiles. Big ones, too. Jaws like steel traps, eyes poking up from the water, just waiting for something dumb enough to get close. Most animals steered clear, but not our lion. He wasn't about to share his land with a bunch of scaly squatters. So he strolled right down to that riverbank, chest puffed out, staring them down like, "You really want to try me?" The crocs hissed and snapped, but he didn't flinch. He waded in, into the water, and started swatting them like they were flies. One big chomp came too close, and he smashed that croc's snout with a paw the size of a dinner plate. The rest got the message real quick. They slunk off downstream, tails dragging, leaving the river to him. Just like that, the king cleared house. Word started spreading after that. The animals around, zebras, wildebeests, even the birds, knew something big was up. This wasn't just some lion holding a patch of dirt. This was a force of nature, a guy who didn't just chase off a few pests, but took on whole armies in one. Hyenas? Gone. Crocs? Out of here. And he didn't even break a sweat. Well, maybe a little, but you get the point. He'd stroll through the grass after, mane catching the wind, looking like he knew exactly how badass he was. And he was just getting started. That territory was his now, every inch of it, and he'd fight anything that dared to test him. But the real test? That was still coming. So, our lion, the one who sent 400 hyenas packing and turned the crocodiles into yesterday's news. He was the king of his turf now, no question. But here's the thing about being king. There's always someone who thinks they can take your spot. And in this case, that someone was the alpha male lion who'd been running the show before our guy showed up. This alpha? He was no pushover. Picture a beast with a mane so dark it looked like a storm cloud, scars crisscrossing his face from fights he'd won, and a roar that could make the ground shake. He'd ruled this chunk of Kenya for years, and he wasn't about to let some new hotshot roll in and steal his throne without a scrap. It all went down one afternoon, sun blazing overhead, the air thick with dust. The alpha caught wind of this new lion strutting around like he owned the place, because, let's be real, he kinda did after the hyena and croc situation. So, the old king came prowling over the hill, eyes locked on our guy, letting out this low growl that said, "You're in my house, punk." Our lion didn't back down, though. He squared up, mane fluffed out, tail flicking like he was ready for anything. The tension was insane. Zebras in the distance stopped grazing, birds went quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. This was it, the showdown everybody'd been waiting for. The fight kicked off fast. The alpha charged first, all muscle and rage, aiming to tackle our lion and pin him down. But our guy? He was quick, dodged to the side and swiped back, claws raking the alpha's shoulder. The old king roared, spun around, and came at him again, this time landing a hit. His teeth sank into our lion's flank, and blood hit the dirt. For a second, it looked bad, like maybe the new guy had bitten off more than he could chew. But then he twisted free, shook it off, and went full berserk. He slammed into the alpha, paws hammering down like sledgehammers, teeth flashing. They rolled, a tangle of fur and fury, kicking up dust so thick you could barely see who was winning. It went on like that, blow for blow, neither backing off. The alpha was tough, no doubt, but our lion had something extra. Call it grit, call it heart. He just wouldn't quit. Finally, he saw his shot. The alpha lunged, overreached, and our guy ducked low, then exploded up with a headbutt that cracked like thunder. The old king staggered, dazed, and our lion didn't waste a second. He pounced, pinned him, and clamped his jaws around the alpha's neck, just enough to say, "It's over." The alpha growled, thrashed, then went still. He wasn't dead, but he was done. Our lion let go, stepped back, and watched as the old king slunk off, tail low, disappearing into the grass. When the dust settled, our lion stood there, chest heaving, blood dripping from a nasty gash across his face. That fight had cost him. He'd carry that scar forever, a jagged line running from his brow down past his eye. But you know what? It didn't make him look weaker. It made him look like a legend. The animals watching? They spread the word fast. This wasn't just a lion anymore. This was the lion, the one who'd taken on the king and won. That scar wasn't a mark of shame, it was a badge. And now, with the alpha gone, there was no one left to challenge him. The throne was his. All right, so our lion, the one with the scar, the guy who sent hyenas running, cleared out Crocs, and took down the alpha, he wasn't just some random tough guy anymore. He was the king, and not just of some little patch of dirt, either. We're talking the Masai Mara, this huge, sprawling chunk of Kenya where the plains stretch out forever, rivers carve through the land, and the sunsets look like they're on fire. It's wild, it's beautiful, and it's tough as nails, a place where only the strongest make it. And this lion? He didn't just make it. He ruled it. For 12 years, he held that territory like a champ. 12 years. That's a lifetime out there, where every day's a gamble, droughts, floods, rival lions sniffing around, you name it. But he didn't flinch. That scar on his face, the one he got fighting the alpha, it became his calling card. Every animal in the Mara knew what it meant. This was the guy who didn't lose. Zebras would scatter when they saw him coming. Elephants would trumpet and steer clear. Even the leopards up in the trees would slink off rather than test him. He'd stroll through the grass, mane catching the breeze, that scar glinting in the sun, and it was like the whole place bowed to him. He didn't just sit around looking pretty, though. Running the Mara was work. He'd patrol his borders every day, miles and miles of it, roaring loud enough to echo across the plains, letting everyone know who was in charge. If a young punk lion wandered in, thinking he could start trouble, our king would shut that down real quick. One glare, maybe a quick swipe, and they'd be gone, tails between their legs. He kept the hyenas in check too. After that 400-strong beatdown, they never dared come back in force. The Crocs? They stayed downstream, out of his way. It was like he'd drawn a line in the sand. This is mine, and you're not taking it. But it wasn't all fighting. He had a pride, too, a family of lionesses and cubs who looked up to him. The lionesses were tough as hell, hunting wildebeest and zebra to keep everyone fed, but he was the rock they leaned on. He'd watch over the cubs, letting them climb on him, batting them gently with those massive paws when they got too rowdy. At night, you'd hear his roar roll out over the Mara, deep and steady, like he was telling the stars themselves, "I've got this." And he did. For 12 years, he kept the peace, kept his pride safe, kept his kingdom strong. The Masai Mara isn't some fairy tale land. It's raw and real, and ruling it that long takes more than muscle. It takes smarts, guts, and a fire that doesn't go out. Our lion had all of that. That scar wasn't just a mark from one fight. It was proof he'd faced everything the wild could throw at him and come out on top. By the end of those 12 years, he wasn't just a king to his pride. He was a legend to every creature that called the Mara home. And legends? They don't fade easy. So, this lion, the one with the scar, the guy who ruled the Masai Mara like it was his personal backyard, he wasn't some random champ who just stumbled into power. Nah, this guy was born for it. From the minute he opened his eyes as a cub, you could tell he was different. Even back then, he had this spark, this vibe that said, "I'm not here to mess around." His mom, a fierce lioness in her own right, raised him in the heart of the Mara, teaching him the ropes, how to hunt, how to fight, how to survive. But honestly, he took it way beyond that. He didn't just learn to live. He learned to rule. As a cub, he was scrappy, always wrestling his littermates, always the last one standing. The other lions in the pride noticed it too. Even the old king back then, the one before the alpha he'd later take down, would watch him with this squint, like he knew this little guy was trouble. And he was. By the time he was a young lion, barely grown into his mane, he was already chasing off jackals and standing up to bigger cats. It was like he came into the world with a crown on his head, and he spent every day proving it fit. When he took over the Mara, after the Hyenas, the Crocs, and that epic throwdown with the Alpha, he didn't just sit on his throne and chill. He lived like a king every single day. Picture this. Sunrise hits the plains, and there he is, perched on a rock, mane glowing like fire, that scar cutting across his face like a battle flag. He'd watch his pride move out to hunt, and you could see the pride in his eyes, not the cocky kind, but the real kind. He'd earned this. He'd fought for it, and he made sure every moment counted. Whether he was roaring to mark his turf, chasing off a rival, or just lying in the shade with his cubs tumbling over him, he carried himself like royalty. No doubt, no fear, just pure, quiet strength. 12 years is a long haul out there, and he didn't waste a second of it. He built a legacy, not just with his claws, but with how he kept things together. The pride grew under him. Cubs turned into strong lions and lionesses, and the Mara stayed his. Other lions came and went, droughts hit, floods rolled through, but he was the constant. That scar? It wasn't just a mark of one fight anymore. It was a story of every battle, every win, every time he said, "Not today," to anything that tried to take him down. The animals knew it. The land knew it. He wasn't some king who got lucky. He was born for this life, and he lived it to the fullest. By the end of those 12 years, he wasn't just a ruler. He was the heart of the Masai Mara. Old now, slower, his mane a little grayer, but still that same fire in his eyes. He'd sit there, watching the sun dip low, and you could almost hear him thinking, "Yeah, I did that. Born a king, lived a king." Nobody could argue with that. But even kings don't last forever. And his final chapter? That was coming up next. So, our lion, the one with the scar, the king of the Masai Mara, born for it, lived it. He'd been holding it down for 12 years. By now he was old, you know? His mane had streaks of gray, his steps were slower, and that scar across his face stood out even more against the weathered gold of his fur. But don't get it twisted, he was still the king. Those eyes, still sharp. That roar, still deep enough to rattle your bones. He'd built this kingdom from the ground up, chased off 400 hyenas, sent Crocs packing, took down the alpha, and he wasn't about to fade out quietly. No way. A king like him, he was going out on his terms. It happened one evening, the kind where the sky's all orange and purple, the air's still, and the Mara feels alive. He'd been patrolling, same as always, checking his borders, letting out that low growl to remind everyone who was boss. His pride was nearby, lionesses lounging, cubs playing, and you could tell they felt it too. Something was different. He climbed up onto his favorite spot, this big, flat rock overlooking the plains, and just sat there. Not pacing, not roaring, just watching. The sun was dipping low, painting everything gold, and he looked out over it all. The rivers, the grass, the herds moving in the distance, like he was taking it in one last time. He didn't lie down weak or anything dramatic like that. Nah, he stayed upright, chest out, mane catching the breeze. The pride gathered below, quiet, like they knew. And then, real slow, he let out one final roar, not loud or angry, but steady, deep, the kind that says, "I was here." It rolled across the Mara, echoing off the hills, and every animal out there paused. Zebras froze mid-step, birds went still, even the wind seemed to listen. Then he settled back, closed his eyes, and that was it. The king with the scar was gone. No fight, no struggle, just peace. Like he'd decided it was time, and that was that. The next morning, the Mara felt different. The pride mourned, sure, soft growls, nuzzling his body, but it wasn't just sad. It was proud. He'd passed like a real king, on his rock, in his kingdom, with his family around him. Word spread fast. The animals talked about it in their own way, hooves stomping, wings flapping, and the legend grew. That scar? It wasn't just a mark anymore. It was him. The hyenas stayed away. The crocs didn't dare come back. And even the young lion stepping up knew they'd never fill his paws. He'd ruled 12 years, and he left it all better than he found it. Now, years later, they still talk about the king with the scar out there. Not just a lion, but the lion, the one who owned the Masai Mara, who lived big and bold and went out like royalty. His cubs grew up strong, his pride carried on, and the land? It remembers him. Every roar in the distance, every shadow on that rock. It's like he's still there, watching. Born a king, lived a king, passed like a king. That's the story of the king with the scar. And man, what a story it is.